Amos Crowder knelt down in his own cotton and pulled apart a bowl that should have been white. Inside it there was a grub, fat and pale, and no bigger than a grain of rice. The square around it had already gone yellow. He looked at it a long moment. 60 acres. His whole life bent low in those rows and turning against him one square at a time. He did not curse. He was not a cursing man. He just took off his hat, the way a man does at a graveside, and held it against his chest and let the June sun sit on the back of his neck like a hand he could not shake off. Down at the gin that same Saturday, the bank man was smiling. His name was Horace Tunstall. He had a soft face and hard eyes and a ledger under his arm. And he moved along the store porch among the ruined farmers like a man picking through a bin of apples. "The bank can take that worry off you, Crowder," he said. 40 cents on the dollar. A fair price for land that won't make. 30 men stood around him, every one of them too broke to argue and too proud to answer. And the wind moved the dust in the road, and nobody said a word. Then a voice came off the store porch. Quiet, level, a woman's voice. It belonged to the widow he had run off his own place last winter. "That's the Mexican Weevil," she said. "I buried a husband and a farm to it, back in Texas. And I know how to beat it." Nobody believed her. Not one man there. Hold that. Hold it right there, where nobody believes her yet. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go on, do this one small thing for me. Subscribe to the channel, and down in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from tonight. Just the name of it. I want to see how far this story travels, from porch to porch and kitchen to kitchen, the way stories used to travel. Now, let me take you back to the spring, before the gin, before the weevil, when Amos Crowder still thought a man could carry 60 acres on his own 2 shoulders and never ask a living soul for help. It was the spring of 1921. Bethel Crossing, down in Tallapoosa County, Alabama, a crossroads with a store, a gin, a church, and a bank that answered to men who had never set foot in the county. Amos Crowder farmed 60 acres of cotton on land that had been his wife Ruth's before it was his. Ruth had been 2 winters in the ground. He worked the place alone now, him and a hired boy named Tobe, and he worked it well. Nobody could say he didn't. His rows ran straight as scripture. His mule was fed before he fed himself. His fences held. But the land carried a note. $1,140 owed to the Coalfield and Planters Bank, and the note came due the last day of the month. Amos had made the figures work in his head 100 times. A good crop cleared the note and left seed money over. A poor crop left him standing at the bank with his hat in his hand. And a man like Amos Crowder would rather die than stand anywhere with his hat in his hand. He rose before light every morning of his life. He chopped his own cotton and hoed his own middles and greased his own gin belt when the time came. He ate what the boy cooked or what he cooked himself, which was not much, and it did not matter, because he had stopped tasting food the winter Ruth died. He was 44 years old. He had a strong back and steady hands, and a grief he wore under his shirt like a stone on a string, and he had convinced himself, all the way down, that the 2 of them were the same thing. That the ache was strength. That needing no one was the proof of a man. It was that same pride, understand, that had put Della Whitfield off his place the winter before. It had started innocent enough. His sister-in-law, Verna Sykes, Ruth's older sister, a thin woman with a thin mouth, had taken it on herself to post a housekeeper's notice on his behalf. A widower with no wife to keep his house, she said, was a scandal and a shame, and she would not have the neighbors thinking Ruth's own kin let her husband live like a hog in a pen. Amos had not asked her to do it, but the notice went up at the store, and in the raw end of that winter a widow answered it. She came up from cotton country, though he never asked where or why. Her name was Della Whitfield. She was 38 years old, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a plain, steady face and hands that had done real work, and she came to keep the house of a man who did not want his house kept. She lasted 4 days. She was good at the work. That was the trouble. She scrubbed the smoke off the lamp chimneys and swept out the corners and had a pot of real supper on the table by dark, and on the fourth evening she moved Ruth's sewing basket off the sideboard to wipe the wood beneath it, and Amos came in from the barn and saw the basket sitting in a different place than Ruth had left it. That was all. That was the whole of it. A basket 6 inches to the left. Something in him went white and cold. "Leave it," he said. She turned, the rag still in her hand. "I only moved it to. I said leave it." His voice was quiet. That was the frightening thing about Amos Crowder. He never raised his voice. He got quieter and colder the closer he came to breaking. "You can gather your things in the morning." She stood very still. "Have I done poor work? You've done fine work. Then what have I done?" And he said the thing he would remember later, in the dark, when everything he owned hung by a thread. He said, "I buried the only woman that'll ever run this house." She did not cry in front of him. He gave her that much credit later. She packed her one bag in the morning and Tobe carried it to the road, and she went into town and took in washing, and became the widow the town called the washwoman, and Amos Crowder told himself he had done a hard, right thing, and went back to being alone, which was what he called strength. That was winter. Now it was June, and the cotton was up and green and knee-high and full of squares. And something had come into the field that did not care one thing about Amos Crowder's pride. He found the first of them without knowing what he'd found. A square hanging limp where it should have stood proud. He thumbed it open and saw the little puncture, neat as a needle hole, and inside a knot of rot where the bloom should have set. He walked the row and found another. And another. By the end of that row he had a fistful of dead squares and a cold feeling climbing his spine. Cotton that shed its squares before they could set was cotton that made no bolls. Cotton that made no bolls made no money. And no money meant the last day of the month, and Tunstall's soft face, and Ruth's land going under the auctioneer's hammer. He'd never seen the like. That was the worst part. Amos had farmed cotton his whole life and his daddy before him, and he knew rust and knew rot and knew the army worm and the boll rot. But this was none of those. He walked to the far end of the 60, and it was there too. The plants themselves looked fine. Green, tall, healthy as you please. But the squares were dropping off them like a woman shedding tears she couldn't hold. And where the squares fell the ground was littered with them, drying and curling in the sun. He sent Tobe over to the county agent's office in the county seat. The boy came back late with his hat in his hands. The agent had a line of men out his door clear to the street, the boy said. Every farm on the creek had it. The agent said its name was the Boll Weevil. Come east at last. The thing they'd been reading about in the paper for years, marching up out of Texas one county a year, and now it was here, in Tallapoosa County, in Amos Crowder's cotton. And the agent said there was talk of poisons, but no man had enough of the right poison, and nobody rightly knew how to use it, and the best he could tell folks was to pray for a dry fall. Amos did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp low and did his figures again, and no matter how he moved them, the numbers came out to the same place. If the weevil took half his crop, the note buried him. And it had already started on more than half. The next morning he did a thing that told him, in his own gut, how bad it truly was. He took a length of string and tied off a single square, a good fat green one high on a strong plant, and he wrapped a twist of cloth around it, and he told himself he'd watch that one square. Protect it. Prove to himself that a careful man could still bring cotton in. He came back to it 3 days later. He unwrapped the cloth with his own 2 hands. The square was hollow. Something had gone in past his string and his cloth and his care and eaten the heart out of it and gone on, and left him holding an empty shell he had sealed himself. He stood in the row a long time with that hollow square in his palm. Then he closed his hand around it and walked to the house and did not tell the boy. Saturday came. Saturday was the day the whole crossroads came into the store and the gin, and Amos would rather have stayed in his field, but he was low on flour and lower on hope. and a man had to look his neighbors in the eye or admit he couldn't. So he hitched the mule and drove in. The store porch was full of men, and every one of them wore the same face. It was a face Amos had never seen on that many men at once, and he knew it because he'd been wearing it himself for a week. It was the face of a man watching his year die in the field and knowing he could not stop it. They stood slack against the posts and the rail. They did not josh each other the way farmers do on a Saturday. They just stood, and now and then one of them would say a low word to another, and the other would nod, and the silence would close over it again. And in the middle of them, working the porch like a preacher works a mourner's bench, was Horace Tunstall. He had driven out from the bank in a black automobile that sat in the road gathering dust and children. He wore a town suit and town shoes, and he had that ledger under his arm, and he went from man to man with his soft voice and his hard eyes, and what he was selling was surrender. "Now I hate to see it, Sykes. I truly do," he was saying to a stooped old farmer as Amos came up the steps. "But you've got to be practical. That land won't make a bale this year, everybody knows it. The bank's prepared to be generous, 40 cents on the dollar, cash money, and you walk away clean. No note. No worry. You think on it." He moved down the rail. "Henson, same offer stands for you. A man your age don't want to go into the fall owing what you can't pay." And the men said nothing. They looked at their shoes. Because 40 cents on the dollar for land that had been in a family 80 years was a robbery dressed up as a mercy, and every man there knew it, and not one of them had another card to play. The Weevil had taken their cards. Tunstall knew it too. That was why he smiled. He had come to buy a whole creek bottom of cotton land at 40 cents on the dollar. And the Weevil was doing his bargaining for him, and all he had to do was walk the porch and be patient and let the ruin ripen. He came to Amos Crowder. He said the name like he was pleased to find it on his list. "I've got your note in here. Comes due end of the month, I believe, 1140. He let that sit. "I'll be honest with you, since you're a sensible man. You're not going to make that note off this crop. Nobody on this creek is. Now the bank could go the hard way when the day comes. Or you and I could settle it right now, friendly, and you'd walk off Ruth's place with a little cash in your pocket and your dignity in one piece. Which is more than most of these men will have by fall." He should not have said Ruth's name. Something moved behind Amos's eyes when he said it. But Amos Crowder had spent 2 years learning to hold still while things broke inside him, and he held still now. "I'll make my note," he said. "With what cotton?" Tunstall smiled. "Go out to your field, Crowder, and count your squares on the ground before you tell me what you'll make." And there it was. Amos had no answer. He stood on the porch in front of 30 men who all knew he had no answer, and the shame of it climbed up his throat. And for one terrible moment, Amos Crowder was closer to breaking in public than he had ever been in his life. He could feel the men not looking at him. He could feel Tunstall's patience, which was worse than any cruelty. And he opened his mouth without knowing what would come out of it, and probably what would have come out was surrender, 40 cents on the dollar, and Ruth's land gone, and the last of him gone with it. And a voice came off the store porch behind Tunstall. "Quiet, level, that's the Mexican Boll weevil," the voice said. "And there's a way to fight it that none of you are talking about." Every head turned. It was the washwoman. Della Whitfield, in a plain gray dress with her sleeves still damp, come out onto the porch with a bundle of clean wash in her arms, and she set the bundle down on the rail and looked past Tunstall at the whole slack-faced crowd of them like a woman who had seen this exact scene before and knew how it ended. "You bury your squares," she said. "The ones that fall, the ones that hang, you don't leave them lay. Every fallen square's got a grub in it. And every grub's a weevil in 10 days, and every weevil lays 100 more. You pick them up and you burn them, or you plow them under deep. That slows it. Then you set your trap rows, you plant a strip early and thick to draw them. And you kill them where they gather. And when the count comes up bad, you dust. Calcium arsenate, laid on at first light while the dew holds it. My husband and I fought it 3 seasons in Texas that way. It can be beat, It has to be caught early, and it has to be worked hard, but it can be beat. For a moment, nobody spoke. And then, of course, because they were men and she was a woman, and this was 1921 in Tallapoosa County, they did not thank her. They doubted her. Old Sykes made a sound in his throat. Someone near the door said, not quite under his breath, that he'd take his farming advice from a farmer and got a low laugh for it. Tunstall recovered his smile and turned it on her like a lamp. "Well now," he said. "The washwoman's an agronomist. Ma'am, I don't believe these men need." But it was Amos she had wounded worst, and she had not even looked at him yet. Because every word she'd said was a word he needed, laid out plain and sure by the very woman he had thrown off his land for moving a sewing basket. Every doubt those men muttered, Amos felt in his own chest, doubled. Because his doubt was tangled up with shame. She knew a thing that could save him. And he had told her to gather her things in the morning. Now she looked at him. Only at him. The porch went quiet around it. "A weevil don't care about a man's pride, Amos Crowder," she said. "And neither does a bank." Her voice did not rise. It got, if anything, gentler, and that was what made it land like a blade. "But I do. God help me, I do." And she picked up her bundle of wash and walked down the steps and up the road toward town, and left him standing there with 60 acres dying behind him and $1,140 in front of him, and the one person alive who knew how to save him walking away with her back straight. Tunstall chuckled and moved on down the rail. But something had shifted on that porch, small and real. The men were quiet in a different way now. A seed had been dropped into ruined ground, and even the ones who scoffed had heard it, and would carry it home and turn it over in the dark. And Amos Crowder drove his mule home with his flour unbought and his mind roaring, and did not sleep again that night either. He fought it his own way first. Of course he did. He was Amos Crowder. For 3 days he did exactly what she'd said without letting himself think it was because she'd said it. He and Tobe walked the 60 acres bent double, picking up fallen squares into cotton sacks, hauling them to the turn row and burning them in a smoking heap that stank of rot. His back gave out and he worked past it. Tobe's hands cracked and bled and the boy never complained. And at the end of 3 days of the two of them working from dark to dark, Amos stood at the edge of his field and understood the truth of it. 2 pairs of hands were not enough. Not for 60 acres. Not against a thing that laid 100 eggs where you killed one. The field was too big, and the weevil was too many, and the last day of the month was too close. He needed the trap rows planted right, and he needed the dusting done right, and he did not know how to do either, and there was one person in Tallapoosa County who did. He held out one more day out of pride. Then the calendar beat the pride, the way it always does in the end. He put on his good coat, which he had not worn since the funeral, and he hitched the mule to the wagon and he drove into town in the long gold light of evening. And he asked at the store where the widow Whitfield took her room, and they told him the little house behind the blacksmith's where she boarded with old Mrs. Pruitt. And he drove there and sat in the wagon a full minute before he could make himself get down. She was in the side yard, taking wash off the line. She saw him and did not stop her work. She folded a sheet against herself, corner to corner, the way a body does, and waited. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. His hat was in his hands. He had not planned for it to be. It had come off on its own. "I'll come to it plain. You know how to fight this thing, and I don't. My crop's dying and my note's due, and if I lose the crop, I lose Ruth's land." He made himself say the rest. "I was wrong to put you off my place. I won't stand here and pretend I wasn't. I'm asking you to come back and work the crop with me. I'll pay you a fair wage, and if we bring it in, if we save it, I'll cut you a share of the cotton, an honest share, in writing. And you'd have your room in the house again, and your board, for as long as the work runs." She was quiet a moment. The evening moved in the leaves. "You put me off your place over a sewing basket," she said. "Not cruel. Just true. I did. And now the weevils in your cotton, so you've remembered I'm of use to you." "Yes," he said. He could have lied. He did not. "That's exactly the size of it, and I'm ashamed of it, and I'm asking anyway, because I've got nobody else to ask and no time to be proud in." And something in the plainness of it reached her. Because Della Whitfield had spent her whole life being of use to people who did not want her otherwise, and here at last was a man ugly enough about it to be honest, and honest was more than she'd been given in a long while. She looked at his $60 coat worn for her sake, and his hat turning in his hard hands, and she thought of her own reasons, which she did not tell him, which were older than his note and heavier than his pride. She thought about cotton, and a grave in Texas, and a debt she carried that no bank had ever written down. "I'll come," she said. "But hear me first. If I come back to that house, I come as the woman fighting for that crop, and you'll do what I say in that field even when it galls you. Because I've beat this thing and you haven't. And when it's over, whatever it costs me, I'll have earned my share honest, and I'll walk off clean if that's how it ends. I'm not coming to be run off a second time." She looked at him hard. "Can you take orders from me, Amos Crowder? Truly?" "For Ruth's land," he said. "I can take orders from the devil himself." The ghost of something crossed her face. Not a smile, but near it. "Well," she said, "let's hope it don't come to that." And she gathered her clean wash into the basket and told him she'd have her bag ready in the morning. And Amos drove home in the dark with something in his chest he had not felt in 2 years, and could not name, and would not have called hope if you'd made him. But that is what it was. He told Verna the next day because Verna would hear of it within the hour anyway. She came to the house with her mouth already set. "You've brought that woman back," she said, "into Ruth's house. To sleep under Ruth's roof and eat off Ruth's dishes. To save Ruth's land," Amos said, "which is more than talk will do. There's a name for a man keeps a strange woman in his house, Amos, and there's a name for the woman, and it isn't hired help." Verna's voice shook with the pleasure of her own outrage. "My sister isn't cold in the ground. My sister's been 2 years gone," Amos said, quiet. "And she'd not want her land sold to Horace Tunstall for 40 cents on the dollar so her sister's feelings could stay comfortable. Della Whitfield knows how to fight the weevil. I don't. That's the whole of it, Verna. And it's all it is." But he saw it land wrong in her eyes, saw her file it away, saw her decide something behind that thin face. And he did not have the wit just then to be afraid of it. He had a field to save. Della came in the morning with one bag, the same bag Tobe had carried to the road the winter before. Tobe carried it back in now and could not stop grinning about it, and Della cuffed him gently on the shoulder and told him to quit shining at her and go hitch the mule. There was work. And there was. She walked the rows first, all 60 acres of them, that first long day, with Amos and the boy trailing her, and she read that field like a woman reading a letter from home. She showed them the fallen squares and the hanging squares and the neat weevil punctures, and she actually counted, so many punctured squares in so many feet of row, and did a figuring in her head that Amos did not follow but trusted, because she did it the way he did his cotton figures, sure and quick. She marked out where the trap rows would go. She set Tobe and 2 hired creek boys to the square picking, but organized now, systematic, row by row and burned by dark, not the flailing thing Amos had done alone. Within a week the sheer falling off of the near rows slowed. Not stopped. Slowed, but Amos had watched his crop do nothing but die for 3 weeks, and to watch it merely slow its dying was like watching a fever break by a single degree. And he began, against everything in him, to believe her. Then came the mopping, which was the second proof, and the strangest thing he ever saw done in a cotton field. She mixed arsenic into cheap black molasses and thinned it with water in a barrel, a foul sweet poison, and she gave every hand a rag on a stick, and they went down the near rows dabbing the mixture into the top of every plant, where the weevils gathered to feed on the tender growth. It was slow, ugly work, and it stank, and it stained their hands black, and Amos thought privately it was a fool's errand. But the weevils came to the sweet, and the sweet was poisoned, and along the rows they mopped, the killing began in earnest. Amos would find them dead in the mornings, the little gray snout beetles, curled at the base of the plants where they'd fallen. And the near rows, the ones they'd mopped, held their squares. Held them, set bowls. While out on the creek, on every farm that had done nothing but pray, the cotton kept shedding down to bare sticks. It was somewhere in those weeks that Amos began to watch her instead of just working alongside her. He caught himself at it and did not stop. In the evenings, after supper, she would take out a notebook. It was a worn leather thing, soft at the corners, the cover dark with the oil of a working man's hands, and she would sit at the kitchen table by the low lamp and read it, and sometimes copy a figure from it, and sometimes just hold it. He asked her once, only once, what it was. "My husband's," she said, and something closed in her face, and he did not ask again. But he understood it was where the knowledge came from, the trap rows and the mopping and the dusting to come. Emmett Whitfield's own hand, from cotton country the weevil worked out in ink across the years, and his widow reading it by lamplight in another man's kitchen to save another man's crop. One night she fell asleep against a cotton sack in the barn, waiting on the mule to foal a colt that came fine in the end. And Amos found her there near midnight, worn down to the bone from work that was not even her own land. And he stood over her a moment, and then he took the horse blanket off the stall rail and laid it over her, careful, and turned the lantern down, and went to the house. He did not tell himself why he did it. He would not have had an answer. And she saw things too, though she said nothing. She saw that his plate went cold most nights, that he moved the food around and ate a third of it and pushed it back, and that this was not new grief but old, a habit of a man who had stopped tasting his life. She said nothing about it, but she started making a thing or two the way it might be made in a house where somebody wanted you to eat, and watched, and waited. Then there was the night she thought she was alone. Amos had gone out to check the barn and come back quiet in his sock feet, and he stopped in the dark of the front room because the lamp was still up in the kitchen and she was at the table with the notebook open. And she was weeping. Not loud. A woman who had taught herself to cry without sound. The way she'd taught herself not to cry in front of him the winter before. Her shoulders shook and her hand lay flat on the open page, and the tears came down her plain, steady face and dropped onto the oilcloth, and Amos Crowder stood in the dark and understood not one thing about it. He did not know what she carried. He did not know about Texas, about the grave, about the crop she had not saved. He only knew that the woman fighting to save his 60 acres was crying over a dead man's notebook in his kitchen at midnight, and that he had no right to any part of it, and no words that would not be an intrusion. So he did the only thing his poor stunted heart knew how to do. He stepped back into the dark, and went out to the porch, and let her have her grief alone, and said nothing to her about it, then or after. But he lay awake that night too, and for once it was not the note that kept him. It was the shape of her shoulders shaking in the lamplight, and the question underneath it that he could not have put into words. Who was she, this woman he had thrown out over a basket and begged back over a bug? What had it cost her, really, to stand on that porch and name the thing that had killed his crop? What did a widow bury, that she would come clear across from Texas to fight another man's weevil in another man's cotton, and weep over the doing of it? He did not know. He turned it over and over in the dark and could not make it come out even, the way his cotton figures always came out even, and it troubled him worse than the note did, because a man could count a note. And out past the window, in the near rows they had mopped, the cotton stood in the dark holding its squares, setting its bowls, greening up against a ruin that had swallowed every other field on the creek. It was going to come down to the dusting now. The all-or-nothing thing she'd named on the porch, the calcium arsenate laid on at first light, the costly gamble that would either carry them home or finish them both. She had already started figuring the cost of it, the poison and the mule hire and the men, and Amos had seen her count her own small money out on the table one night and go quiet over how short it fell. He did not know yet what she meant to do about that. He did not know she meant to spend her own last dollar on his field. He did not know she was about to bind her own ruin to his harvest so tight that if his cotton died, she would be destroyed a second time along with it. But the last day of the month was coming on hard, and the dew still fell every morning, silver on the leaves, waiting for the poison. And Della Whitfield sat at the kitchen table with her dead husband's notebook open to a page she'd read 1,000 times, doing a sum that would not come out, and Amos Crowder lay awake in the next room learning, too slow and too late, to wonder about a woman. The dusting would decide everything. And the dusting was 3 days off. She came to him the next morning before the sun was full up. He was at the barn, harnessing the mule by feel in the gray light. She had the notebook under her arm, and her one bag was not with her, and that was how he knew she meant to stay a while yet. "We dust tomorrow," she said. "At first dew. Not the day after. Tomorrow." Amos set the collar down. "The poison's not paid for." "It will be." She laid the notebook on the feed bin and opened it to the page. Emmett's hand, the letters leaning like fence posts after a wind. Calcium arsenate. 8 pounds to the acre, laid on wet leaves so it sticks. We need better than 400 pounds for the near fields. The mule hire for the second team. 2 more men if Tobe can find them. That's money I don't have till the cotton's ginned. I know what it is. She looked at him steady. I've got it. He stopped. You've got it. I've got a little put by. From the washing, in town. From before. She did not blink. I'll spend it on your field. Amos felt something go tight in his chest. A man does not take a woman's last dollar. His father would have walked into the creek first. No, he said. No, I won't have that. You'll have it, Della said, because there's no other hand reaching. You can be proud on the last day of the month, Amos Crowder, standing in a field of sticks with the bank in your yard. Or you can let me spend my money and keep your land. You can't do both. The mule shifted. Out past the lot the near rows stood dark green against the paling sky, holding. And past them the county fell away to gray. Why? He said. It came out low. Why would you bind your own money to my ground? You owe me nothing. I ran you off this place. For a moment something moved behind her face, and he thought she might tell him the whole of it then. She didn't. She closed the notebook. Because if I'm going to fight this thing, she said, I'm going to fight it all the way, or not touch it. Half fighting a weevil is how you bury everything you love. I learned that. She picked up her bag from where it had been leaning against the bin all along. Get the mule fed. We've a long day before the dusting day. He watched her go up to the house. He did not know it yet, but she had just chained her ruin to his harvest so tight that nothing but a saved crop could set her loose. If the cotton died, she died with it a second time, and this time there would be nothing left to come east with. They dusted at first dew. It went on before light, the 2 teams moving down the rows with the dust guns, Amos on one and Tobe on the other, and Della walking between them calling the pace. The calcium arsenate came off the nozzles in a pale cloud and settled onto the wet leaves and stuck there, white as a light frost, and the smell of it burned in the back of the throat. They tied wet rags over their mouths. By the time the sun cleared the tree line, the near 40 acres stood dusted and ghost pale, every leaf furred with poison. And Della stood at the turn row with her hands on her hips and something in her face that Amos had not seen there before. Not hope. Closer to a dare. Now it works or it doesn't, she said. Now we wait on it. It worked. 3 days, and the difference was a thing you could see from the yard. On the dusted rows the squares held. The little grubs that hatched into the poisoned leaves died in the eating of them, and the plants quit shedding, and they set their bolls and greened up and grew. Past the fence, on the Henson place, the cotton had gone to sticks, bare gray stalks with the fruit rotting on the ground beneath, and the Hensons standing in it like men at a funeral. On Ezra Pruitt's ground the same. All down the creek the same. But Amos Crowder's near field stood green and heavy and setting, and a man riding the county road slowed his wagon to look at it, and could not make sense of what he saw. Della kept the notebook by the lamp at night and read it and made her sums. Amos took his orders in the field and did not argue them anymore. And somewhere in those days the thing between them began to turn, the way the cotton had turned, quiet, in the dark, without either of them naming it. The boy took the fever the second week. Tobe went down at supper, gray in the face, his eyes gone glassy, and by dark he was burning so hot the sheet steamed off him. Amos stood in the doorway of the little room helpless as a post. He had watched Ruth burn like that at the end. He could not make his feet carry him in. Della went in. She rolled her sleeves. She sent Amos for cold creek water and vinegar and had him haul it till his arms shook, and she sat the whole night with the boy, wringing the cloths, talking to him low, and when he thrashed and called for a mother 2 years dead, she held his hand and told him hush. She was right here, hush now. Toward morning the fever broke, and the boy slept, damp and quiet and whole, and Della came out onto the porch where Amos sat and lowered herself onto the step like her bones had gone to water. "He'll do," she said. "He's a strong one." Amos looked at her. The dawn was coming up behind the cotton, and her face in it was gray with tiredness and streaked and plain. And he thought he had never in his life seen anything he wanted so much to keep. "Della," he said. It was the first time he'd used it. Not the woman, not you there. Her name. She turned her head. She'd heard it too. "You never told me the whole of it," he said. "Why you weep over that book? Where you buried what you buried?" She was quiet a long moment. The cicadas were starting up in the heat already coming. "Not this morning," she said. "This morning I'm too tired to cry, and I don't want to tell it dry." She got up, one hand on the post. "There's biscuits. I made them last night before the boy went down. There's molasses if the ants haven't found it." They ate the biscuits on the step with the sun coming up over a green field, and he broke one open and put molasses on it and handed her the half. And she took it, and something he said, he never could remember after what it was, some fool thing about the mule, made her laugh. Just once. Short, and surprised out of her, like it had got loose before she could stop it. And Amos Crowder sat there on his own porch and heard a woman laugh for the first time in 2 years and knew that whatever this had started as, it was not that anymore. The house came back to life around her. She'd righted it without asking. The floors got swept, the windows washed, Ruth's things dusted and set back exactly where they'd been. She was careful of that. Careful past what he'd have thought to ask, moving nothing an inch out of its place. The sewing basket sat on the sideboard where it had always sat. She never once touched it. But other eyes were on the green field too. Horace Tunstall came out the Crowder Road on a Thursday in his black coat with his ledger under his arm, and he stood at the fence a long time looking at the cotton no ruin had touched. He did not like what he saw. Ruined land at 40 cents on the dollar was inventory. Saved land was a farmer who paid his note and told the bank to go hang. And there was more than one green field turning that man's arithmetic sour. He found Della at the well. "You're the washwoman," he said, "from town. Whitfield, I'm Mrs. Whitfield. You've done a piece of work here." He smiled the smile he used on ruined men. "The bank could use a woman who knows cotton. I could see you set up somewhere better than a hired room. A settlement, let's call it, enough to start clean, somewhere west, away from a place that don't want you." He let that sit. "Folks say you weren't wanted here. Be ashamed to stay where you're not." Della drew her bucket up hand over hand. "You want me gone off this farm. I want what's best for a hard-working woman. You want the note to fall due with the man alone and scared." She set the bucket on the well curb. "I know your kind of best, Mr. Tunstall. I buried a place to it once." She picked up the bucket. "Get off this land. And take your settlement with you." He kept the smile, but it had gone thin. He looked once more at the green rose, and Della saw him doing the sum a banker does, and she knew he'd not leave it there. Verna came the same week, and Verna was worse, because Verna came inside. She came under cover of a visit to her dead sister's things, and she walked through the clean house with her mouth pulled small, and she found Amos in the lot and stood close so the boy wouldn't hear. "She's put herself in Ruth's kitchen," Verna said. "She's got Ruth's dishes down. Next it'll be Ruth's bed, and Ruth's name, and you'll wake up one morning married to a stranger with a hard luck story, and Ruth 2 winters cold and forgot. She's saved my crop, Verna, has she?" Verna's eyes were flat. "Or has she found herself a widower with land and a note she can get her name on?" "You know nothing about that woman, Amos, where she came from. What she left behind her out west. You never asked, and I'm telling you, there's a reason a woman comes 800 miles to work another man's field for wages." She smoothed her skirt. "I've written some letters. I know a little more than you do now. And when I've got the whole of it, you'll hear it, whether you want to or not." She left him with it. And a thing like that, once said, does not unsay itself. It sat in Amos through the good green days, and would not settle, the way the widow's grief had once sat in him. And he was ashamed of it, and could not make it go. The rain came the night before the bank's field inspection. It came off the west after dark, a hard summer storm, the kind that stands the cotton up and lays it down, and Amos lay awake listening to it drum the roof and felt his stomach go to ice. He knew what rain did. Della had told him the first week. Rain washed the poison off the leaves. A hard enough rain, and the arsenic that stood between his crop and the weevil was gone into the mud. And the grubs would hatch clean into a green field with nothing left to stop them. By morning the storm had blown through, and the sun came up hard and bright on a washed world, and the leaves that had been furred white were green and clean and bare, every last grain of the poison beaten off into the ground. And Tunstall's inspection was that afternoon. Della stood in the wet rows with the notebook and did not say anything for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was flat with figuring. "We dust again. Soon as the leaves dry. Tobe, ready the guns, there's no more poison." Amos's voice came out cracked, the last of it went on 3 days back. You spent your money, there's nothing to buy more with till the cotton's sold. And the cotton can't be sold if the weevil's back in it, and Tunstall's coming this evening to look at a field of, he couldn't finish it." And that was when Verna came up the road in her buggy, and she had a letter in her hand, and her face was terrible and satisfied at once. "I'll tell you what she is," Verna said, loud, so the boy heard, so the whole wet morning heard. "Since you won't ask her. Della Whitfield had her own farm in Texas, her own husband, and they went down to this very weevil 3 years back. The crop, the land, the man, all of it, gone to the bank in one season. She couldn't save her own place. She couldn't save her own husband. She turned the letter like a card. And you let her spend your last poison and your last dollar on a gamble that already ruined her once. She'll bury your farm same as she buried his. It's the only thing she knows how to do." The morning went very still. Even the cicadas seemed to quit. Amos turned to Della. And he was frightened. And the note was 2 days out, and the poison was gone, and the field was bare, and out of the fear the ugliest thing in him came up and out before he could stop it. "Is it true?" he said. "Did you bury your own crop to this? Did you watch your own man go down and not save him?" His voice rose. "Is that what you brought onto my ground? A woman who already lost this fight once and lied to me about it every night at that table." Della stood in the wet cotton with her dead husband's notebook against her chest. She did not flinch. She had known this was coming since the porch at the gin store. Maybe, when she spoke it was quiet, and it carried anyway. "Yes," she said, "it's true. All of it. Nobody moved. His name was Emmett. We had 120 acres in Fayette County, Texas, and the weevil came in 19 and 18. Ahead of everybody's knowing what it was. And Emmett fought it the wrong way. He fought it proud. Same as you did those first 3 days. He wouldn't dusting cost money we owed already, and he said a man doesn't throw good money after bad. He picked squares by hand and thought hard work would beat it, because hard work had always been enough before. Her voice did not break, but it had a stone in it. It wasn't enough. He worked himself gray. He'd be in the field by lamp and out of it by lamp, and the weevil ate faster than 2 hands can pick, and the bankman rode our road same as yours. 40 cents on the dollar. Take the worry off you. Emmett wouldn't. Pride. He took a fever in the wet of a bad fall, worn down to nothing, and he was in the ground before the cotton was, and the bank took the ground after. She looked at Amos. I learned to fight the weevil too late to save one thing I loved. I wrote his book over and over till I knew every line, and when I heard it had come east, I came east. Because cotton is the last of him I've got, and I could not stand in Texas and watch it happen to somebody else's man, and not. She stopped. She would not beg. Della Whitfield had begged the bank once, on her knees on a porch, and it had bought her nothing, and she had promised herself never again. So no, she said. I didn't lie to you. You never asked me. And you're standing there so afraid of losing your land that you'll throw the only thing that can save it back in its face, the exact way he did. She closed the notebook. The leaves are dry enough by noon. There's 100 pounds of arsenate left at the co-op at Dadeville, and I've got just enough for it if a man will haul it. That's the last order I've got for you. Dust again at first light tomorrow, before the inspection means anything, before the weevil sets in the wet. Dust or don't, and lose it all like he did. And then she did the thing he never forgot. She handed the boy the notebook, keep it dry, Tobe, and she walked out of the field and up the road, in the wet, toward town, 20 miles, with her back straight and her one bag left behind her in the room, and she did not look back once. She left with her dignity in both hands. But she left the order behind her, laid across his harvest like the horse blanket he'd laid across her the night he found her sleeping. Amos let her go. God forgive him, he was too proud and too scared and too gut-shot to call her name. And he watched her walk out of sight around the Henson fence, and Verna made a small, satisfied sound beside him, and he wanted to strike her. He didn't dust that day. He sat on the porch with the note in his mind, and the fear in his belly, and Verna's poison in his ear, and he near-talked himself into the black coat and the ledger. 40 cents on the dollar. Let the bank take the worry. A man alone couldn't do it. A man alone had never been able to do it. But it was the boy who moved. Tobe came to him at dusk, the notebook wrapped in oilcloth under his arm, dust still in the creases of his neck from the last dusting. Mr. Amos, he said. She left the order. Dust at first light. I hired the Pruitt boy already, and Ezra said we could use his mule for the hauling if we're at Dadeville by dark. He stood there 15 years old and steady as a fence post. She saved my life with her 2 hands, and I ain't going to stand here and let the weevil take the field she saved it for. I'm going for the poison. You can come or you can sit. And Amos Crowder looked at a boy doing the brave thing while a grown man sat, and he was ashamed all the way down, and the shame burned the fear out of him at last. Get the mule, he said. I'm coming. They hauled the arsenate through the dark from Dadeville, Ezra Pruitt riding out to help them load it and saying not one word about the woman he'd have courted himself. And they dusted at first dew the next morning, the boy on one gun and Amos on the other, the 2 of them where the 3 had been. And the pale cloud went down over the wet green rows and stuck. They dusted the whole of the near 40 by the time the sun cleared the trees. And the crop, that had been beaten bare of its poison and left for dead, took the second dusting and held. Tunstall came for his inspection and found green cotton furred white with fresh poison and a Boll count that would clear a note, and he snapped his ledger shut and did not smile. And the days ran down toward the end of the month, and every morning the difference grew plainer, until by the last week of it a man on the county road did not have to slow his wagon to see it. Crowder's rows stood green and heavy, the Bolls opening white, the whole 40 acres alive and setting, and on every side of it, the Hensons and the Pruitts and all the laughing mens from the gin store porch. Gray sticks, bare ground ruin, you could stand on the road and put the two side by side and there was no arguing it. The widow had been right, and the field said so, out loud, to the whole county. The morning of the last day of the month, wagons came up the road slow. Neighbors on their way to the gin, ruined men, and every one of them slowed at the Crowder fence and looked at the green, and did not speak, and one old man, it was Henson, took off his hat and held it against his chest a moment, the way a man does at a graveside, or in a church. Then he put it back on and drove on. The vindication needed no words. It stood there in the field for anyone with eyes. They picked and hauled and ginned that week, and on the last day of the month Amos Crowder drove his cotton to the town gin, with the note falling due at 3 o'clock, and half the county was there to see it. The gin yard was full. The platform scale stood in the middle of it, the big hook hanging, and the bales came up one after another, and the clerk called the weights, and the men who'd laughed on the porch that Saturday stood along the fence and watched a saved crop come across the scale. Tunstall was there with his ledger open on the plank, and he had come expecting a foreclosure. He had the paper half drawn. Coalfield and Planters, 60 acres, the Crowder note, due and unpaid, land to the bank at 40 cents on the dollar. He sat with his pen ready over it. The clerk finished the last bale and figured the ticket and called it out over the yard, the weight and the price, and it was more than enough. It cleared the $1,140, and it left seed money over the top of it, and a sound went through the crowd like wind through cotton. Amos walked to the plank. He counted the money out of the sale onto the wood in front of Horace Tunstall, bill by bill, slow, so every man could see it. $1,140. He set the last one down and put his finger on the stack. "That's the note," he said. "Paid, the last day of the month, same as the paper says. You can tear up whatever you were drawing there." Tunstall looked at the money and did not touch it. The whole yard was watching him. He had ridden that porch offering 40 cents on the dollar to 30 broke men, and the money on the plank in front of him was the sound of his scheme coming apart in the open. In front of all of them, in front of the very men he'd meant to buy out cheap next. "Take it up, Mr. Tunstall," Amos said. "Quiet. It's legal tender and it's every cent owed. Take it up and mark the note paid, or I'll have the clerk here witness that the bank refused a lawful payment. Your choice." A long moment. Then Tunstall picked up the money. He counted it because he could not help himself, and it was all there, and he had to write paid across the note in his own hand, with the whole county watching, and hand Amos the receipt. His face when he did it was a thing the men at that fence talked about for years. He closed his ledger. He got in his buggy, and as he turned it in the yard, old Henson called out, not unkind, "Just true. Reckon there's cotton land you won't be buying cheap this fall, Horace." And the yard laughed, 30 men who had stood too broke and too proud to answer him that Saturday. And Horace Tunstall drove out of Bethel Crossing with the laugh following him down the road. Verna Sykes stood at the edge of the crowd. She had come to see a ruined man. She watched him pay his note instead, and she watched the men shake his hand, and she was doing a sum of her own now, what it would look like, going forward, to be the woman who'd tried to run off the one who saved the Crowder place. She recalculated in silence. She did not stay for the end of it. Tobe stood by the scale grinning, black and white with gin dust. And when Amos got the receipt in his pocket, he put his hand on the boy's neck and said, "That's yours as much as mine," and meant it. But the yard, and the money, and the note paid, none of it was the thing Amos had come to town to do. He got back in the wagon, and he drove it across town to the row of hired rooms where a washwoman took in the county's laundry. And he found her in the side yard at the tubs, and half the street stopped to watch him do it. Della had her sleeves rolled and her arms in the gray water to the elbow, steam rising off the lye, a wet sheet twisted in her hands. She'd heard the note was paid. The whole town had heard by noon. She did not look up when the wagon stopped. She'd said her piece in his field, and she would not say it twice. Amos got down. He took off his hat and held it in both hands, the way a man holds it at a graveside, or in a church, or in front of a thing he means to keep. He came across the yard and stood at the edge of her tub. "The note's paid," he said. I heard. Crop came in. Cleared it with seed money over. He turned the hat. "Wasn't my 2 hands did it. I know whose it was." He swallowed. "I said a thing to you in that field I'd give the whole crop back to unsay. I was afraid, and I was proud, and I threw the one good thing in my life back in its face, same as your Emmett did his field, and I near buried mine the same way over it." He looked at her. "You were right about all of it. The weevil. The dusting. Me." Della let the sheet down into the water. She still hadn't looked at him full. "I didn't come here to pay you wages," Amos said. "I know what I owe you, and it's not money, and I couldn't cover it if it was. I came to ask you to come home." His voice went rough. "Not as hired help. Not to keep the house. Ruth's gone 2 winters, and she'd be the first to say a living man's got no business alone on 60 acres pining after the dead. I'm asking you to come home and stay." "Stay," he stopped. There wasn't more than that in him, and there didn't need to be. Stay, and Della Whitfield, who had told herself she was only ever useful and never wanted, who had walked 20 miles in the rain rather than beg, stood in the steam with her arms bare and wet, and looked at the man in her yard with his hat in both hands, and the whole street watching, and she let the wet sheet fall back into the tub. It slapped the water, and neither of them heard it. "You sure?" she said. It came out not quite steady. "You know the whole of me now. The buried farm and the buried man and the hard luck of me. You want that in Ruth's house. I want you in it," Amos said. "The luck can come too. We'll dust it if it turns." And that got the laugh out of her again, the second one in 2 years, and this one had wet in it, and she wiped her face with the back of a soapy wrist and left a streak of it there. And she said, "Let me get my hands dry then, Amos Crowder. And you can drive me home." Down the street, Ezra Pruitt sat his wagon and watched it happen. The good man who'd have given her an easy life and never asked her to fight a weevil for it. He touched his hat brim to her, the once, and he was the first to know he'd lost, and he took it like the decent man he was and turned his team for home. Some men step back with grace. He was one. A year on, it was 1922. And the cotton was up again on Ruth's 60 acres, clean and green and setting, and there were 2 people in the rows working it side by side. They'd torn up the arrangement in the fall, the wages, the written share, the room and board of it, and made it over into something the paper couldn't hold. They were married in the little church at Bethel Crossing in the cool of that first fall, with the crop in and the note long paid, and Tobe standing up beside Amos in a collar that near choked him. Verna came. She sat in the back and pressed her mouth small, but she came, because in a town that size you come, or you're the one folks talk about. And she had done enough of her own recalculating to know which she'd rather be. She sent a set of Ruth's mother's linens over after, with a card that said only for the house. One dry line. It was as close to sorry as Verna Sykes ever came, and Della took it in the spirit a thing like that is meant, and put the linens on the bed and moved nothing else an inch. Horace Tunstall they saw once more, at the gin the next season, and he did not offer anybody 40 cents on the dollar that year, because the whole county had watched a widow beat the thing he'd built his ledger on. He tipped his hat to Della, stiff, and she gave him back a nod as dry as a bowl in October, and that was the whole of their conversation, and it was enough. Some men you don't forgive. You just outlive their scheme and let the field speak. The notebook still sat on the kitchen table, Emmett Whitfield's worn leather notebook with the soft corners and the oil-dark cover, the Weevil methods in his own leaning hand. But it had a new page in it now. Della had written it herself. The first line in her own hand after all those years of only reading his. The count of the second season. The dusting dates, the boll weight, and under it, in ink, a line that was not about cotton at all. She read it to Amos once by the lamp and never again, and he never asked her to, because a thing like that you only need to hear the once. The grief relic had become a record. The book that had been all she had left of what she buried was now the ledger of what she'd grown. On the porch in the evening, the cicadas came up out of the heat the way they do, and there was supper on a plank table, and beyond the rail the cotton stood green in the last of the light, 60 acres of it, alive. Amos had learned a thing, slow and late, the way he learned everything. A man could do a great deal with one pair of hands. He'd farmed 60 acres alone, and grieved alone, and near lost it all, alone, but there are things one pair of hands cannot save. A crop against the weevil. A house gone cold. A life. Those take two. If you've watched this far, comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far down the creek this story travels.